You're listening to the Cliff Notes Podcast, a fan podcast dedicated to the Twilight Saga fan podcast. This is our reaction to Cliff Ravenscraft's reaction to the Twilight series, chapter by chapter. Listen as we see it through Cliff's eyes.
Hey guys, you are currently listening to our very first episode, the intro episode to Cliff Notes Podcast. And this podcast is basically where we are going to be reacting to a reaction that somebody named Cliff had to the Twilight books. We're going to get into the details of this in just a few minutes. First, I thought we should introduce ourselves. My name's Melanie.
And I'm Kim.
And we are here to provide you with some interesting content. I want to start out by saying that the idea to have this podcast came to me in a dream, and this is a true story. Similar to Stephenie Meyer, if you're a Twilight fan, which you should be if you're listening to this podcast, Stephenie Meyer actually had a dream to write the Twilight series, and we all see how that turned out. And well, I guess I should start from the beginning. I'm a diehard Twilight fan. I'm a fan of the series, and I just can't get enough of it. So I listen to it on the audiobooks over and over. I read the books. I watch the movies. I've listened to this story over and over again, and I wanted to see it through somebody else's eyes because I've seen it through my eyes over and over again. I wanted to see it through somebody else's eyes. So I went to Apple Podcasts and I typed in the word Twilight, and I found a fan podcast dedicated to Twilight. And this podcast was by two people, a married couple, Stephenie and Cliff Ravenscraft. And they read the book, and after a few chapters, they sit down and do a podcast about their reaction. And Cliff is an interesting character. He's an interesting guy, and the way that he sees Twilight really, it excited me. And I fell asleep while listening to their podcast, and I had this amazing dream that I had started my own podcast. And it was with Kim, and me and Kim were actually reacting to the reaction of Cliff and talking about how he feels about each chapter of Twilight. I woke up and I sat straight up in my bed and I gave Kim a call immediately. And what did you say when I told you about my dream?
I said, okay, I accept the offer. Let's do it. And ever since then, we've been doing it. And like you, I've read the Twilight books. I've become obsessed with them and read them many times, and I enjoy them. And I've been listening to the Twilight Saga podcast and been enjoying that as well. And I don't know how I got into these beyond just you saying, you should listen to them. But we should talk about why Cliff and Steph got into the Twilight books. They read them on a trip to Cliff's parents' lake house in the Smoky Mountains, and it was a foggy week, and it looked a lot like the Pacific Northwest, which is where the Twilight books actually take place. And at this lake house, they decided to read these books in order to set the record straight with their 9-year-old daughter Megan, who asked if she could read the books. And like any good parent, they said, well, gee, I don't know anything about these books. I'll just have to read them myself. And so as they read them over the course of this weekend, they fell in love with them. And like many who read these books, they couldn't eat, they couldn't sleep. It was an experience to behold, and that spoke to me.
Well, I have to interrupt you really fast. Stephenie is the only one who got obsessed. Cliff was never obsessed with the series. And actually, as these podcasts that they're producing are coming out, he is only read up to the chapters that he's reviewing. So he will read 3 chapters at a time, and he will then review them. And Stephenie, on the other hand, she's read them all. So it's just Stephenie that's obsessed. Cliff could do without it, but we're interested in him mainly. Oh, and I do have to mention another part of my dream, which I completely forgot to mention, and it's actually the most important part of the dream. I dreamt that we called our podcast Cliff Notes because we are sort of taking notes and observing this Twilight world through Cliff's eyes. That's why we're called Cliff Notes, and it's all about Cliff. And Stephanie's involved, but this is mainly Cliff. But go on and talk more about how Stephanie was being forced to eat while she was reading these books for the first time.
It was basically Cliff was trying to make a pate out of her liver or something. He was trying to force feed her because she just wouldn't eat anything, and her liver was becoming almost something you would make a pate out of, a nice, like a French pate. And yeah, when I think about what you were saying about Cliff having not read them at this time, I guess you're right, because when I think about it, and if this introduction is a reaction to their introduction, we can react to the fact that at this time, Cliff has done a great thing for, his family. He's read halfway into New Moon, maybe even over halfway into New Moon.
No. It's interesting because we haven't discussed any of this before. We came together today to put together this introduction episode. We listened to it separately, and we are coming together for the first time right now. And Kim, you are absolutely wrong. This is not accurate information. He has only read chapter 3 of New Moon as of the introduction. So completely inaccurate information. You need to check your facts before you come on to this show and just spout nonsense.
Now, was that information at the end of the introduction episode, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, like Cliff, who could only read a couple chapters into New Moon, I only listened to about half of this episode of the Twilight Saga podcast. I had things going on, I had places to be, and I couldn't be bothered with listening to this entire episode. Even though I enjoy all these episodes and everything, I just couldn't be bothered with it.
That's interesting, considering that we had this planned out for 2 weeks, that we were going to do this episode. We were going to have listened to the podcast. We were going to come together.
No, we had a date planned for a week ago.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, and as you might recall, your Skype wasn't working. Your computer charger wasn't charged. You couldn't find your phone, and the moon and the stars were going to fall out of the sky and this and that, and you couldn't do it. And so now we're doing it at a different date.
I just don't see the relevance of that, because I had listened to the introduction episode of the Twilight Saga podcast. So I was already prepared. My Cliff Notes had been written in my journal for weeks.
Let's move past it.
Okay.
Let's talk about how this is like a chain reaction or something.
Okay. So, yeah, we're reacting to a reaction. And what we were hoping with this all along was that we would then spark other people to want to react to us, who would then react to them.
We kind of wanted this to be kind of like a food chain of reactions, or a chain reaction, or not necessarily chain reaction, because we would want other people to make reactions to this podcast, and then other people could make reactions to those podcasts. And so I guess that would make more of a kind of a pyramid shape, or an upside down pyramid shape. So this could be kind of a pyramid scheme of podcasts.
Well, yeah, it is a pyramid scheme of podcast. And since we are the first to do the reaction to the reaction, we would hope that any further podcasts after us that would be reacting to us would then have to give us a little bit of money. We're only here for that dough. We're here for the green. We're not here to entertain for fun. We're here to make money. Let's be honest, folks. We want the coins. We're not just here for fun. So
yeah, show us the coins, folks.
There's ways that you can donate to us, and we will be setting that. We'll have a little button on our website, and we'll get that information out to you as soon as we have that all set up, to where you can come in and pay us when you're ready to start your own podcast, your Melanie Notes or your Kim Notes podcast, whatever it is.
Well, I would hope that some folks would want to have a Kim Notes.
We'll see how prepared you are next time, and maybe if you are, there will be a few Kim Notes out there.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to discuss in this episode?
Well, it was pretty much just the introduction. They were complaining a lot about the movie, so I know we'll be talking more about that in future episodes. So this is all I had for this first episode. And in our second episode, we will be reacting to Cliff's reaction of the chapters 1 through 7 of Twilight, the first book. So that's going to be really interesting.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, this is Melanie and Kim signing off.
We'll see you next time, folks.